They fired me 6 minutes into my first day back. No onboarding. No welcome meeting. Just security, a printed script, and a woman who wouldn't look me in the eye. What they didn't know was this. The woman they were escorting out owned 72% of the company. And by the time the CEO's new daughter-in-law finished drafting her victory post, her title was already legally void. This is how getting fired became the most expensive mistake this family ever made. My name is Julia Mercer. I was sitting in Executive Office 402, the glass fishbowl they called an executive suite, trying to remember whether my temporary login required a special character or just a capital letter. IT had emailed me a password that looked like someone had slammed their forehead against a keyboard, and I was carefully typing it into Slack, one deliberate keystroke at a time. According to my offer letter, I was returning as an executive advisor, a ceremonial role that usually means smiling politely, offering strategic comments, and staying out of the way while younger, louder people pretend to lead. I was perfectly fine with that. I had already spent 20 years building the skeleton of this company. I didn't need to hunt anymore. I never got to press enter. The glass door didn't open gently. It was pushed inward with a kind of urgency that felt rehearsed. I stopped typing, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, my eyes lifting from the blinking cursor to the small group standing in my doorway. 2 security guards, both visibly uncomfortable. A junior HR associate in a cheap suit, already sweating through the armpits. And leading them, holding an iPad like a shield, was Charlotte Langley, the CEO's daughter-in-law. She was 26 years old, a former lifestyle influencer who had pivoted into corporate leadership 5 months earlier, immediately after marrying Ethan Langley. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer a handshake. She didn't even fake a smile. She stared at a spot on the wall just above my left ear, inhaled the way someone does right before reading lines they practiced in a mirror, and began. Effective immediately, your engagement with Meridian Apex Technologies is terminated, she read, her voice flat and empty. Security will escort you from the premises. Please surrender your badge and any company property. Personal items will be mailed to your address on file. I didn't react. Not because I was shocked, but because I recognized every word. I wrote that script 15 years ago. I drafted it to protect the company from wrongful termination lawsuits. It was intentionally sterile, legally airtight, and completely devoid of empathy. Hearing it come out of her mouth felt unreal. Instead of panic, my attention drifted to the absurd details. The smear of terracotta lipstick on the rim of her oat milk latte. The slight tremor in her hand as she scrolled. The ultra-thin titanium laptop tucked under her arm, the same model I had personally rejected 6 months earlier for having zero return on investment. Apparently my veto power had expired before I even swiped my badge. Behind her, the HR associate was trembling. He clutched a manila folder against his chest like a flotation device. His eyes flicked from me to Charlotte and back again. I knew that look. He had pulled my file. He had seen the internal designation next to my name. Julia Mercer. Advisory. Founder status. He knew this was wrong. He wanted to say something. Fear won. I slowly unclipped my badge. It was an old one, issued before the company's rebrand, back when the logo still meant discipline instead of vibes. The photo was from 20 years ago. Dark circles. Cheap haircut. Long nights. I placed it on the desk. The plastic clicked softly against the wood. Then let's do this properly, I said, my voice calm, quieter than hers. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and picked up my purse. I hadn't even had time to unpack a pen. Tell your father-in-law the emergency board session in 3 hours should be enlightening, I added as I stepped past her. She blinked, confused. There is no board session, she said, breaking script for the first time. That's not scheduled. I stopped beside the HR associate and lowered my voice. "Check your email," I whispered. Then I walked out. The security guards fell into step behind me as we moved through the open-plan floor. Heads turned. Whispers spread. People saw the escort and filled in the story themselves. Middle-aged woman. Outdated executive. Disposable. We reached the lobby, all glass and steel and hypocrisy. The massive LED wall cycled through the company values. Innovation. Integrity. Vision. Family. Family appeared twice. That almost made me laugh. 10 minutes earlier, the receptionist had welcomed me back with a bright smile. Now she pretended to be on the phone, eyes fixed on her screen. To anyone watching, this looked like a loss. A loyal employee discarded. Another corporate casualty. But stay with me. Because while Charlotte was probably drafting a LinkedIn caption about making hard leadership decisions, she didn't realize something important. I don't play games unless I already own the board. The revolving door opened. Cool morning air hit my face. The city rushed back in. Sirens. Traffic. Movement. Behind the glass, the building reflected the sky, hiding the chaos inside. As the door sealed shut, the timeline shifted. Inside 7 different pockets, across 3 time zones, phones vibrated at once. Subject line, emergency board notice. Mandatory attendance. 11 a.m. The game had begun. To understand why they underestimated me, you need to understand where this company started. Meridian Apex wasn't always a glass tower with influencers and vision statements. 20 years ago, it was 2 folding chairs, a warped table, and an overheating server crammed into a garage in Riverside Heights. It was unbearably hot. I remember the heat more than anything. Ethan Langley didn't notice. He was 24, brilliant, caffeinated, convinced he was changing the world. He could code like a prodigy. He couldn't read a balance sheet to save his life. I was 26, a forensic auditor hired as a contractor to clean up the books before a funding round. Within 48 hours, I realized it wasn't cleanup. It was a crime scene. Revenue booked before contracts existed. Payroll coming out of personal accounts. Multiple projections, none of them real. But the product was extraordinary. I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. I rebuilt everything. When I presented the model, Ethan stared at it like scripture. He offered me a VP title and a generous salary. I slid the contract back. I asked for equity. He laughed, thinking he was clever. That was his first mistake. Over the next 2 decades, every time Meridian Apex nearly collapsed, I fixed it. And every time I fixed it, I extracted a price. Shares. Options. Voting rights. Quiet transfers during divorces, scandals, and panic sell-offs. I never took the spotlight. I refused C-suite titles. Advisors don't get fired, after all. Or so they thought. 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday night, I buried a clause deep inside a routine bylaw amendment. Emergency succession. Termination safeguards. Boring language. Lethal consequences. Ethan signed it without reading. He trusted me. He shouldn't have. By the time Charlotte decided to make her first bold executive move, I controlled 72% of the company. She didn't fire an employee. She triggered a fail-safe. And in 3 hours, everyone would understand exactly what that meant. At exactly 10:58 a.m., the boardroom on the 23rd floor felt less like a meeting space and more like a holding cell. The long mahogany table was bare. No catered breakfast, no artisanal coffee, no small talk about markets or weekend homes. Just 12 bottles of room temperature water and 12 identical black binders placed with unsettling precision at each seat. The blinds were half closed, muting the sunlight into a dull gray wash. Every board member was already seated. No one spoke. Graham Langley sat near the head of the table, not at it, still wearing his golf clothes, grass stains drying on his shoes. His son Ethan sat beside him, eyes glued to his phone, scrolling as if denial could save him. At 10:59, the double doors opened. Charlotte Langley walked in smiling. She looked confident, polished, victorious. She carried a leather portfolio and moved straight toward the head chair, the one reserved for real power. "Good morning, everyone," she said brightly. "Sorry for the rush, but leadership waits for no one." She reached for the chair. A voice cut through the room before she could pull it back. "That seat is reserved." Charlotte froze. She turned toward the sound. It was Harlan Pierce, the chairman of the board, a man who had survived recessions, scandals, and indictments without blinking. "You may sit in the observer chairs," he continued calmly, "or you may stand." Charlotte laughed nervously. "I'm the chief vision officer," she said. "I called this meeting." No one answered. Graham didn't look up. Harlan nodded to the general counsel, who opened his binder. Per Clause 27B of the amended shareholder agreement, he read, voice flat, "Your executive authority has been suspended effective 7 a.m. today." Charlotte's smile collapsed. "That's impossible," she said. "I fired Julia Mercer this morning." The counsel looked up. "The termination was unauthorized. It is void." And it triggered the automatic suspension protocol. Silence pressed in. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He didn't look back. She looked at Graham. He whispered, "I can't fix this." Then she saw the empty chair at the head of the table and the brass nameplate placed in front of it. Julia Mercer. Majority shareholder. At exactly 11 a.m., I walked in. Same black suit I'd worn for years. No logos. No jewelry. Just a watch and a lanyard that still said advisor. I didn't pause. I didn't scan the room. I walked straight to the head of the table and stopped behind the chair. I placed my folder down gently and rested my hands on the wood. As majority shareholder, holding 72.04% of voting control, I said evenly, "I move that all executive appointments made in the last 48 hours be rescinded pending review." No one argued. 72% isn't a discussion. It's gravity. The motion passed without a vote. Charlotte stood frozen by the wall, her power evaporating in real time. I didn't look at her. She was already irrelevant. The board recessed. Graham followed me into the smaller war room, the one where we used to celebrate wins. He looked old. Smaller. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. I slid 2 documents across the table. "2 options," I replied. The first was a buyout. 10 times valuation. Enough to hurt, but clean. The second was reorganization. Me as executive chairwoman. Full forensic audit. All nepotism positions dissolved. Charlotte's role eliminated. Ethan removed from leadership. Graham stared at the pages like they were written in another language. "You'd really walk away?" he asked. "I built the wiring," I said. "Not the wallpaper." He hesitated too long. The next morning, an email went out company-wide. Emergency transition briefing. Mandatory attendance. When Charlotte arrived, her badge didn't work. Security escorted her upstairs with a cardboard box. The lobby screen displayed a new org chart. Executive Chairwoman. Julia Mercer. At 9:01 a.m., the board approved the reorganization. Graham's resignation letter sat folded at his empty seat. Titles dissolved. Contracts terminated. Vendor deals cancelled. 15% of my equity transferred into an employee ownership trust. Shock rippled through the room. Stability restored. Charlotte stood by the door clutching her box. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. As I walked past her, we passed the wall where the Langley family portraits once hung. The frames were gone. Only faded outlines remained. Scars. On my first day back, they fired the woman they thought was disposable. In 60 seconds, I erased their legacy. If you stayed until the end, thank you for listening. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your city or country in the comments below and tell me what you think about Julia's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who owns it.